Mr Speaker.
I call the honourable member Ian Less-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I have to say it's a little bit disappointing that national members aren't prepared to engage a little bit more in this debate. A 1-minute contribution, I don't think, really is worthy to the level of debate and the level of seriousness that ought to be applied to this legislation, because the reason why this bill has been introduced to Parliament, the reason why we are having this debate today, is because of the Pike River disaster. Had that disaster not occurred, there is no way this government would have been inspired to introduce legislation to improve health and safety regulations in the workplace. And it's a shame, sir, that it took a tragedy like that to reverse the ideological adherence to deregulation and stepping back from a legislative role in health and safety. And it is absolutely a fact that in a blind, unthinking adherence to deregulation is what led to the Pike River disaster, and frankly it's what is causing the government to fail to respond truly adequately to the appalling situation in the forestry industry right now. Mercifully, as I think Darian Fenton pointed out earlier on in this debate, the forestry industry itself is taking the situation seriously and is working with unions and others. But the system that has always worked in terms of getting the regulatory environment correct, the employment relations environment correct, and the health and safety environment correct has always been the tripartite approach, where the employer, the workers and the government work together and each takes their responsibility. And frankly, for too long, I think government has not been taking its responsibility, and that is the good aspect of this legislation, is that it does, there is a recognition in here that government does have a considerable responsibility in ensuring the health and safety of workers, because it should be an absolute right of every single person living in this country that they should be able to expect to go to work, be safe and come home again at the end of the day. And it should be the right of their families to expect that the breadwinner can go to work and be safe and come back home to them at the end of the day, and that they're not going to lose that person and not go through the heartache and the trauma of not only losing a loved one, but losing the source of the income for that family. And unfortunately, in too many instances, that right has not been something that people in New Zealand have been able to rely on. And whilst events like Pike River, where in a single blow a large number of people have lost, do focus the mind, we do need to be aware that every year when Workers' Memorial Day rolls around, there is a list of names of people who have been lost in the previous 12 months. And that list, those lists are not getting any shorter from one year to the next, and that's a shame. And I do acknowledge that this legislation is part of an effort to actually reduce the incidence of workplace fatalities and workplace injuries. However, it does have to be part of a package, and all the different aspects of the package have to be working together. And there are areas where I think the government does need to lift its game. One of those is certainly in employment relations. The appalling amendments to the Employment Relations Act, which are being pushed through, although the pace seems to have gone off those lately, and maybe those are being parked until after the election, that would be a good thing, because that would mean a Labour government could just scrap that legislation before it's even enacted. But what that legislation demonstrates is that perhaps in terms of workplace health and safety, in the national government, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So on the one hand, they've introduced this very good legislation that, although there are aspects that we would like to see improved, and we will work hard at Select Committee to ensure those improvements are put in place, we broadly support this legislation. You then look at the open and blatant attacks on collectivism, the attacks on unionism, the attacks on workplace rights, the efforts to make work more precarious, the efforts to keep wages down, to encourage people to work longer hours and put their health and safety at risk, seem absolutely at odds with what this legislation is trying to achieve. Likewise, decisions made in ACC appear to be absolutely at odds with this. The ACC Minister, Judith Collins, described health and safety training carried out by both the Council of Trade Unions and Business New Zealand as nothing more than a rort. She ultimately had to go to Business New Zealand, and I think that the exact words, I don't know the exact words, but it was something along the lines of, she did not mean to impugn their integrity. Heaven forbid that Judith Collins should apologise for something. But she didn't mean to impugn their integrity. There was no apology or back down with what she had to say about the Council of Trade Unions, which I think, again, simply betrays the anti-union mood and ideology and anti-worker. That's right. Actually, I think people who earn a salary or a wage are sort of public enemy number one as far as the National Party is concerned, and certainly those who represent them and attempt to further the interests of people who rely on wages and salary are treated with equal disdain by the National Party, and they were certainly treated with that kind of disdain by Judith Collins. The interesting thing is that those programs that were the result of recent announcements and this astroturfing with the taxpayers' union that somehow magically managed to discover the expenditure on these programs at around about the same time. Well, indeed, what has the taxpayers' union said about Judith's trip to China? I'm still waiting for that press release, waiting to see what Jordan Williams has to say about that. But what that revealed was the fact that a number of programs designed to prevent injuries, both in the workplace and for other accounts of ACC, have been cut over the last 5 years. In fact, when Labor was last in government, for the last 3 or 4 years of the Labor government, programs focused on preventing injury in the workplace and in other settings, the expenditure on those was around $40 million a year. In the last financial year, that had been cut to $22 million. So in the time that National has been in government, they have halved the budget for injury prevention. Now, that would be fine if there was really good evidence to say that those programs weren't doing anything. But the evidence from ACC themselves demonstrates that for every dollar invested in those programs, at least $1.12 in treatment was saved, and in some cases as high as $1.23. So that's between a 12 and 23% return on that investment. So it was stopping injuries. So most importantly, people were safer. They could go to work and assume that they were going to come home in one piece without any injury or, heaven forbid, suffering a fatality. But it even saved ACC money. Surely the National Party should understand the value of saving money. But no, they took the short-term approach and cut the programs so that they could cut expenditure, improve the surplus that ACC could record to help them get the government books back into surplus, because they had failed so demonstrably in actually improving economic growth in order to get the government books back into surplus. So, sir, this legislation we absolutely support, but what we do demand of the government is that they demonstrate a true focus on health and safety in the workplace by ensuring that in all their actions they improve the safety of workers. It's not that much to ask, but we're still waiting.
I call the honourable member Simon